Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Brainworms.
Welcome.
We're so back, team. We did it. We've been gone for a little bit. A lot of it, maybe.
Several months.
I think our last episode came out in August of last year.
Wow.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Whoops.
But we're back and we're excited to make more episodes. Thank you for listening or I guess watching some of the other ones we put out. We are now back with an episode that we had recorded before our hiatus that just never made it out. Hey, Joe.
Hey.
I also heard that there's something different about our podcast now.
Does it have to do with YouTube?
It does have to do with YouTube, actually.
Whoa.
Yeah, so why don't you tell me what that is?
The brand new platform, YouTube?
Yes, the brand new fangled platform YouTube with the moving pictures.
Wow. I wonder what this new fact is.
What is it?
I'm the one who knows.
Yeah, you're the one who knows. You're supposed to tell me.
All of our old episodes are on YouTube.
What?
And these new episodes will be also on YouTube.
That is correct, and that is factual.
Whoa. I'm also surprised even though I'm saying it.
So yes, all of our videos, all of our podcast episodes will be on YouTube from now on, which is fun and exciting. You can still also find them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, blah, blah, blah. All of the other podcasting platforms.
Other places.
But yeah, we're super excited. We think it'll be a good time. So make sure you check us out on YouTube too. Our channel is called Brainworms Podcast. So without further ado, here is our episode from the vault. I'm talking about Satanic Panic.
I'm talking about Thomas Sankara.
We hope you enjoy it. Bye.
Hello. Welcome back to Brainworms.
Welcome to a new episode. Today we are recording episode 7. So we're almost at 10 episodes. Kind of, in a way.
We're about 70% of the way there.
Yeah. I hope you liked our last episode. It was fun to record video this time. And we're excited to keep doing that. After we recorded last episode, I realized that I forgot to address something really, really important and very relevant to this podcast. And that is, I would ask you for a drum roll, but no. Okay.
You do it in post.
Okay.
Drum roll.
Drum roll, which I will be adding in post. I got a Labubu! Yay! So during our very first episode of this podcast, I talked about Labubu, and I let you guys know that I didn't have one, but now I do. So here is my Labubu. She's beautiful. I believe she is Sesame Bean is her name. Something to do with sesame, for sure. And she is from the Macaron series. So she's very fluffy. My friend Ale got it for me. So thank you, Ale. Shout out. But now I can say I have a Labubu. And here she is in all her glory. Yay.
Yay.
She could be a mascot too. Along with our little... What is this thing called? Iguana that we got on vacation.
You're going first today.
I am.
What's your topic?
So today I'm going to be talking about something really interesting, as we usually do, hopefully. So this is something I've had in my list of topics for a little bit, and I don't know why, but it felt like the right time to do it. There's really no particular reason. But I'll be talking about the Satanic Panic of the 1980s.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah. And as always, I feel like, we're only on our 7th episode, but 2 things seem to always come up on this podcast. One of them is D&D, because we like D&D. The other one is Twilight, which sadly, other than me mentioning it right now, I don't think it's going to come up again. Although, I don't know. Your topic might be Twilight related. I don't know.
It's not.
But obviously Satanic Panic is also related to D&D, which I will talk about. But yeah. Joe, what do you know about the Satanic Panic era?
So I do know, I'm aware of a little bit, right? So I grew up in the 90s. and both my parents are metalheads, and my stepmom is a big time D&D person. So I was definitely aware of the Satanic Panic, but that I've almost said everything that I know about it. Basically, people freaked out about certain elements of pop culture, and they attributed it to Satan, and they thought it was cults and shit.
Right.
But other than that, I don't really know.
All right, so I'm going to tell you a thing or two about Satanic Panic. So the Satanic Panic was a time when a lot of people in America in like the 1980s were convinced that Satan was real, which I mean, a lot of people already think that before then, obviously, but not only that he was real, but that he was like out in these streets recruiting, you know, like he could be found everywhere. For some reason, some of the things that people started to blame were like heavy metal and rock, a certain very specific board game that we've already, or, you know, TTRPG that we've already mentioned. And also, it even got to be in preschools, which is something I really didn't expect to find in doing research for this. But there was something to do with a preschool where somehow it was linked to Satanic Panic. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about how that all kind of went down, you know, at the peak of the hysteria, like what people were doing or what people were thinking. And obviously, when I say people, I mean like a select group of people, and a lot of them were primarily like Christian, white conservatives who were looking to kind of fearmonger and find, you know, the devil or find bad things within, you know, subcultures and just people that they didn't understand. So I wanted to start with why people were even panicking in the first place. So this kind of all happened in like the late 70s, early 80s. It was like the Cold War era. So everybody was kind of like convinced that the world could end at any second. So people were already on edge.
To be clear, people thought the world could end at any minute because of mutually assured destruction between Russia and the U.S., both having huge stockpiles of nuclear warheads that they were ready to shoot at each other at any moment.
Also, it was a really big time for televangelists. So, like, religion was a part of pop culture in a way that it hadn't been before. This was also like Reagan times, so conservatism was very prevalent in like society. Kind of what I mentioned earlier, like traditional values were held really highly, and anything that went against that, even a little bit, was not to be trusted. So any sort of like subculture, counterculture was like scary and not good. Around this time, there were also a few high-profile crimes that ended up being tied to Satanism. The Night Stalker case, the Richard Ramirez case, who, you know, he very famously carved a pentagram on his hand, and he did a whole thing about Satan and the devil, and that really did a number on what people thought was happening as far as like cults and satanic activity. There was also a book called The Satan Seller by Mike Warnke. He was a Christian stand-up comic. And in the book and in his comedy act, he claimed to have been like the head of a huge satanic cult. And he talked about sacrificing animals and worshiping the devil, like everything, like the works. But this later turned out to like not even be true. He was just doing it for clout, and he ended up, you know, kind of ending his career when everybody found out that he wasn't telling the truth, because the Christian groups that really believed what he was saying turned their back on him once they found out that he was a liar. So that was pretty interesting. So there's also a huge part of why like Satanic Panic became so widespread was because of the media and like the media's role. And there's a lot, you know, that I could talk about, but I wanted to focus primarily on a pretty well-known, very, very popular show at the time, with Geraldo Rivera. So in 1988, Geraldo Rivera had a special called Devil Worship Exposing Satan's Underground. And 20 million people tuned in to this particular special. So at one point during the special, Geraldo looked straight into the camera and said, "There are Satanists who are practicing their evil right now. Satan is alive and well in America."
It's funny that Geraldo Rivera is involved in this case, because I grew up knowing Geraldo Rivera as just a guy on TV, but I didn't know that like one of the things that like launched his career was that he thought that he found Al Capone's like vault, and he made like a big deal about it, and then he actually got to the vault and opened it up, and it was completely empty, and that was just so funny. And I think it's funny that it like
Yeah,
a guy who sort of launched his career on a big fat nothing.
right. He apparently has a lot of credibility. Like a lot of
Credibility?
people. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if this happened after that, millions of people tuned into his show
Oh, I see what you mean.
and believed the things that they were seeing on there.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by
You're,
that.
you're not saying he has credibility. You're saying that like people gave him,
Yes.
they thought he had credibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the special basically ended up being like an infomercial for fear and like instilling these beliefs that, you know, satanic cults are running the world and all of that. It also featured some people that were currently Satanists or previously Satanists. And they also had an interview with Zena LaVey, who is the daughter of Anton LaVey, who is the founder of the Church of Satan. So it was like a whole thing. By the way, I did want to add as a side note, just a note on the Church of Satan. It was founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey. I think at the time people were really clouded by all of this moral panic to know that the Satanic Church isn't really about worshiping the literal devil. It's actually an atheist philosophy that uses Satan as a symbol for like individualism and like self-indulgence and like questioning authority. So, I mean, I suppose at the time they probably wouldn't have liked it anyway because they didn't like atheism, but it's not what, like, for example, this show, the Geraldo Rivera show, was portraying it to be.
I think that like people think of Richard Ramirez when they think about Satanists, where it's like someone who believes in the literal devil and is like trying to do evil.
So now I want to get into the McMartin preschool trial. So in 1983 in Manhattan Beach, California, a mother accused a preschool teacher of molesting her child and said that there were satanic rituals involved. Obviously, this became a big thing in the media. Everybody was talking about it. It was a huge deal. When the kids were interviewed, they were sort of asked leading questions. You know, like, did they take you to a secret underground room? Or anything like that, where they weren't open-ended. It was very much like trying to craft a narrative. The kids under pressure were, of course, starting to craft these like unbelievable stories that ended up serving as evidence for this particular case. In the end, you know, there was no physical evidence at all to prove what the moms and the kids were claiming. You know, there was a lot of talk during the case of like tunnels where these rituals would happen, and the school didn't even have tunnels. So like it was just completely fabricated. It was also later revealed that the woman who is the one who initiated these accusations was like literally psychotic. So obviously she's not a very reliable source when it comes to these accusations. So the McMartin trial became one of the longest and most expensive in U.S. history. 15 million, 7 years, and 0 convictions. And this particular case also led to other similar accusations popping up at other daycares in Southern California. And then, you know, similarly to in the case, it was found that parents and also therapists were sort of were asking all these leading questions that were sort of creating false memories in children and sort of causing them to confess or give all of these statements that weren't true. So sort of like the outcome of this case in general actually didn't end up having anything to do with satanic rituals or anything, because all those people were found innocent. Like the person who was initially accused, the teacher, it was a male teacher, and then the rest of the staff were accused as well. They ended up all being innocent, so there was nothing satanic happening there. But the outcome of the case actually ended up having to do with, a reevaluation or a rethinking of how kids should be interviewed when it comes to criminal cases. Like how to do it properly, how to do it without applying any pressure, where the kid feels like influenced to answer a certain way. So that's sort of what was the bigger outcome of the case. So now we're getting to the portion that I feel like most people associate with Satanic Panic, which is when metal music was literally on trial. This was a whole thing. And the way it starts out is kind of silly. So in 1985, Tipper Gore, who is the wife of Al Gore, decided to make it like her personal mission to let everybody know that heavy metal music and rock were terrible and were corrupting their children's minds and were inappropriate. So she founded something called the Parent Music Resource Center. The video that I watched, which I will link in the description, said that one of the biggest reasons why she decided to start that group was because her daughter really, really liked Prince, and she didn't like the content of Prince's lyrics, so that sort of made her go on this crusade against all kinds of music that was similar in content. The PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, really wanted albums to have warning labels about the lyrical content in the album. So the PMRC also put together a list of songs that they called the Filthy 15. So I have the list of songs. I can read it to you. Darling Nikki by Prince, Sugar Walls by Sheena Easton, Eat Me Alive by Judas Priest, Strap On Robbie Baby by Vanity, Possessed by Venom, We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister, His Toy Soldier by Motley Crue, She Bop by Cyndi Lauper, In My House by Mary Jane Girls, High and Dry by Def Leppard, Into the Coven by Merciful Fate, Trashed by Black Sabbath, Dress You Up by Madonna, Too Young to Fall in Love by Motley Crue, and Let's Go to the Fire by Wasp. So, I mean, I said, and I started out by saying that this was kind of an attack on rock music and heavy metal music, but I mean, in the list there are some that are sort of just pop. But I guess their main issue was like the lyrical content, not so much like the sound of the music. But I think from what I saw, definitely heavy metal and rock music were targeted because of the imagery that is usually associated with the genre. So it was kind of like a double-edged sword in that sense. So there was a Congress hearing with the PMRC about censorship. A few metal musicians went as representatives of like the genre and the industry. It was Rob Halford from Judas Priest and Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. So Dee Snider testified, and this ended up being like really influential, or at least like very unexpected. In the video that I watched, there's a short interview with him where he talks about how because of the way he looks and because of the music he plays and everything, he thought that the Congress people expected him to show up and just like make a fool of himself, but he actually had like a really well put together statement, regarding why the targeting of this type of music was kind of ridiculous and how it was all sort of up for interpretation and shouldn't be censored. So that ended up being a huge part of the Congress hearings.
Just to add a little more to that context specifically around Dee Snider and Twisted Sister. Twisted Sister, the name of the band, is referring to the fact that Dee Snider, as part of the performance for the band, would cross-dress with like, I think it's drag. I think it would count as drag. It's not cross-dressing in like a negative connotation where they're like making fun of anybody. They're using it to elicit a response from the hegemonic culture.
So at the end, the PMRC, they ended up getting what they wanted, and now there's the parental advisory labels on music albums. Obviously the stickers are supposed to warn like parents and just like listeners in general of the content of the music, but it is statistically proven that metal albums or any albums that contained that label ended up spiking in sales. So I think this only made kids want the albums even more. So now we're getting to the D&D stuff, the D&D witch hunt, if you will. We're very familiar with D&D on this podcast. It's a tabletop role-playing game that has fantasy and monsters and all that good stuff. But in the 80s, like the other things I've mentioned, people were convinced that it was tied to the devil, to satanic rituals, to cults, etc. The kind of spark for all of this controversy surrounding the game was in 1979 when a college student named James Dallas Egbert went missing. So a private investigator who was on the case suggested that he was missing because he was acting out a D&D game in real life, and he was going to go under his college campus in the steam tunnels. That wasn't at all the truth. He actually was a very complicated person who was dealing with like mental health issues, and after he went missing, they did find him and he was fine, quote unquote, like he was fine, but he did end up later committing suicide. So like it was, turns out, very unrelated to the game he was playing. So this case ended up inspiring a book called Mazes and Monsters by Rana Jaffe. And there's also a 1982 TV movie starring a very young Tom Hanks. So in the movie, I haven't seen this movie, but there are scenes where he's basically saying like he can't tell what's real or what's the game, etc. So it was very much inspired by the case of James Dallas Egbert.
I actually have watched this movie. I watched it because I wanted to know basically more about Satanic Panic and how people were reacting to it. I mean, I just heard about it. I didn't think it was going to be a good movie, but I just like wanted to see it, and so
like made for TV in the 1980s. I
right.
feel like isn't really something that makes for a good movie.
It wasn't like high quality production at all. Yeah, it was real cheesy. I could tell exactly the place where like, okay, yeah, he's playing a game and then he loses his mind.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad. Yeah.
So in another instance, there was a woman named Patricia Pulling whose son committed suicide, and she was insistent that it had to do with him playing Dungeons and Dragons. So she actually founded a group called BADD, BADD, which stood for Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry, Patricia, but that's funny. So she toured the country, like warning schools, warning parents that D&D was, scary and not to be played by children. So after a while, like D&D Satanic Panic kind of faded. In the video that I watched from the New York Times, there's a few interviews with people who played it in that time period and were like, we couldn't believe that people were saying that this is satanic. Like, it was such a good time and they have such fond memories of playing it. One of the people they interviewed was an author named Juno Diaz, and he talks about how important D&D was for him growing up because he's an immigrant, and it helped him connect with like his new community. It taught him about like teamwork and making like difficult moral choices and being courageous and like being heroic. And so he was one of the people that talked about it like, people were wild back then. It was not satanic at all. It was actually a really fun and good game for children. Even though like Satanic Panic isn't really around in the same way, it did sort of leave a legacy behind. There's other kinds of conspiracy theories that are of similar nature, of similar flavor. People think that there are certain people think that there are like shadowy secret groups out to get their children, and are like hiding in plain sight. So there's definitely still, you know, it's still in the air. It's still around, this kind of like feeling of panic about other people, other kinds of people that aren't exactly like you. Stranger Things sort of became like not a parody, but like I guess parody like of Satanic Panic, and like taking, the themes of, like D&D and like fantasy worlds and like evil creatures coming to life, and sort of turned that into a story that wasn't as grim as some of the things that people were assuming, but it also is something that became part of like pop culture in modern times that could be sort of tied to Satanic Panic. But that's it. That's all I have.
I thought that you might have mentioned Harry Potter, because even though it's a bit later than the original Satanic Panic, it sort of had its own Satanic Panic. Like my mom even, would tell me that, I shouldn't be reading Harry Potter because it was satanic and stuff. And this is definitely something she heard at church. And luckily I didn't live with my mom, so she couldn't like make me not read it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course now I don't read it, but like for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
But at the time I, absolutely loved it. Classic millennial.
Read it even more times despite her.
Yeah, reading it more, reading it harder. But I even ended up telling her, like, I think there's actually a lot of biblical parallels in the actual books than you'd probably expect. And I think in later years, she was like watching the movies without a word about it. So like, I think she got over it at some point. It's interesting too how this Satanic Panic is sort of the beginning. I don't know if beginning is the right word, but the beginning of like the culture wars and like the modern, it has influenced like the modern, culture wars. And it's kind of ironic that like, even though we are sort of experiencing now the downfall of, modern American society or whatever, it is more due to like the fear and that they had at that time than the thing that they were actually afraid of, and like the consequences of them like having this fear about nothing has led to just terrible things in our society today.
Your turn. What are you talking about today?
So today I'm going to tell you about Thomas Sankara.
All right.
Yeah.
Excited to find out who that is.
Yeah. Okay, let me set the stage. West Africa. We have an image in our mind of what Africa is like, and it's largely wrong or largely due to the consequences of colonialism. West Africa is a region of the world that is very rich in resources. Gold, ivory, other minerals. The southern part of Western Africa has a very like lush tropical region. In the medieval times, were very bad for Europe, overall, largely. It was the Dark Ages, but actually other parts of the world were thriving at this time. So like, the Islamic world was very flourishing, and like intellectually speaking, they were like top of the game. Yeah, so basically the Islamic world was sort of an intellectual powerhouse in the medieval times, and that included northern and western Africa. And so there was major cities, like Timbuktu was a major trading center and like hub of scholarship, Islamic scholarship at the time. Nearby was another city called Ouagadougou, and it wasn't as much of a hub of scholarship, but it was a hub of trade. And it was conquered by the Mosi people. They held on to it for a very long time. So there was a lot of empires and kingdoms in Western Africa at the time, and this city of Ouagadougou was able to resist all of that and remain independent for a very, very long time. They also resisted a conversion to Islam, which was very a lot of other peoples in the region were converting to Islam at the time, and they resisted that as well for a very, very long time, up until European colonialism, essentially. And so the French took over much of Western Africa. They colonized most of Western Africa. In particular, in 1896, they conquered Ouagadougou and turned it into a colony of France. I'm going to try to quickly go through this like colonial and decolonization sort of period quickly, but basically in the early 1900s, it was a colony, and then it sort of got rearranged by France into other pieces of their other colonies in the region. After World War II, the Mosi people, occupying Ouagadougou, basically put pressure on France to turn it back into a specific, into its own colony. And so they did in 1947. So this is after World War II. This colony was called Upper Volta. So Ouagadougou is a city, and it is the capital of this new territory/country called Upper Volta, and that refers to a river that's in the area called the Volta River. So as a French colony, the indigenous people of the area were not treated well. There's records that like they were not allowed to pick fruit off of the trees. Only French children could do that. They could not ride bikes, or else their parents would like go to jail. Yeah, so there's discrimination as you'd expect in a French colony in Africa. So in 1958, the Upper Volta became an autonomous republic. In 1960, they achieved total independence from France, at least on paper. So their first president, Yameogo, he was the first president of this new independent Upper Volta, and he was not very well liked. He was a very hated president. He very quickly after taking power banned all other political parties, so there was only his party. This is sort of where our character is going to come in. So Thomas Sankara was born in 1949. So this is shortly after Upper Volta became like reformed as a entity itself, not like part of Mali and part of these other countries around, these other French territories. And so he was sort of around, as a kid for all these like sort of subsequent developments of Upper Volta becoming more and more independent. 1960, when it gains its independence, he's about 10 years old. By 1966, he's 16 years old. And Yameogo is still the president, but 1959, towards the end of the year, people are talking about, people are protesting, people are doing lots of different things and organizing, and essentially call for a general strike. And it looks like it's going to happen for early January. Long story short, Yameogo is deposed. They take him out. He's not killed, but he is removed from office. I think he's arrested at some point. But this is a military coup, specifically. And so at this time, 1966, so he's 16 years old, Thomas Sankara. The military is very popular. It's considered by like the intellectuals in the country as like the vehicle for change. The military is going to be the way that we can root out corruption. It is the way that we're going to usher in modernization for this country, Upper Volta. Thomas Sankara, in his childhood, did very, very well in school. He excelled in mathematics and French. It's a French colony, but they still spoke their languages. and then French on top of that. So he did very well in mathematics and French, and at 16, he joins the military academy. In the military academy, he is studying lots of different subjects, including social sciences, geography, and history. And his teacher, Adama Touré, was secretly very radical, held very radical beliefs, and incorporated that a lot into his lectures. They also held secret meetings, not secret, informal meetings, where he would talk about, colonialism, imperialism, communism, and the revolutions that had happened both in Soviet Russia, in China, and also in Cuba. Also at this time, Thomas is, just as a side note, he's playing a lot of guitar. So he plays jazz and he's in a band. So it's just a cool side note. So he has this sort of radical education in the military academy while he's a teenager. Then at 20, he is sent to Madagascar for more military academy training. And there he experiences an even more radical education. So there's a lot of French professors there that have very left beliefs. And so there he encounters the works of Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin. I think he read Mao Zedong. He also meets and interacts a lot with an intellectual named Samir Amin. So Samir Amin is half Egyptian and half French. He's actually the one who coined the term Eurocentrism. His big ideas were that, quote-unquote underdeveloped countries, like a lot of African countries and other ones, they shouldn't be, trying to play ball with essentially the European rules. Like the way that the Europeans want global economy to go, these underdeveloped countries are not going to thrive and succeed by playing by those rules, because obviously the Europeans set it up for them to win. And so he advocated for delinking from the global economy. And what he means by that specifically is that these underdeveloped countries ought to focus on internal development, like developing themselves as a country economically internally, and put global, international trade relations as secondary to that. He influences Thomas Sankara a lot. So then in 1972, Thomas Sankara leaves Madagascar, goes back to his country, Upper Volta, begins his military duty, and he fights in a border war with Mali. And they win. Thomas's side wins, and he gets a lot of notoriety for this. So within Ouagadougou, he becomes a very popular figure, even though later he said the fighting in that war was unjust and useless. But he nonetheless is becoming a popular figure, and his band is actually pretty popular too. His jazz band is popular in the city. So here's this guy, very smart, winning wars, and a musician on top of it, right? He's of course that guy's going to be very popular. So over the years, throughout the 70s, he's climbing the ranks in the military, and fast forward to 1981, he is appointed the Minister of Information. Unlike previous ministers of information, he encourages journalists to go after the information they're seeking out, to find corruption and publish it. Most of the time, Minister of Information, their job is to hide as much as they can from the journalist, right? Just try to put out a positive message for the current administration. In April of 1982, he resigns his position as the Minister of Information because of the direction that the administration was going, of being very anti-labor. Later that same year, so in November of 1980, so he resigned in April, and by November, there is another coup. There's another coup. It takes out the administration that he was under before. A guy whose name I'm not going to really be able to pronounce, Ouedraogo, becomes the new president. And under this guy, Thomas is actually appointed to prime minister. So this new guy is the president, and I guess the prime minister in this system is under him. So Thomas Sankara is now the prime minister of Upper Volta. and he lasts very short time. So he gets so there's that coup in late 82, and in January of 83, Thomas Sankara is appointed to prime minister, and immediately starts pushing the president for more progressive policies, and so lasts until May, right? So January to May is how long he's the prime minister. And so then the president says, I'm done with you. He dismisses him from the position. He arrests him for being too radical, basically. And this is not a good move, because Thomas was very, very popular with a lot of people. Like I was saying, within Ouagadougou in general, but like with the officers in the military in particular, he was very, very popular, especially in a country like Upper Volta. If the military is not on your side, then you don't have a chance, right? They're doing military coups every other day. So he's arrested in May of 83, and basically the unrest that this induces in the military officers gives his friend Blaise Compaoré enough momentum to organize another military coup. So Blaise Compaoré is a name I'm going to want you to remember, because he's going to come up again later. But he organizes another military coup to overthrow that guy whose name I couldn't pronounce, who was the president. And so this coup happens, it's successful, and they take Thomas Sankara out of prison and appoint him to president. So now he's president of Upper Volta. Now there's nothing stopping him from going full on with his beliefs and the way that he thinks that they should be organizing the country, right? So he's very knowledgeable about, he had a lot of education, so he knows a lot about agriculture, he knows a lot about, military strategy, but he also has these beliefs of delinking the country's economy from the global economy, thoughts about the environment and about decolonization, lots of things, right? And now he just gets to go full out with all of these policies. One of the first things he does is he forms the Council of the Revolution. It was publicly known, but it was not known exactly how many people were part of the council. But this council made a lot of decisions for the country. It was all done on a collective basis. So they were voting and they were debating things and coming to decisions, even in, taking into consideration suggestions made by government officers and various people who are giving suggestions about what they should do, and then they have these debates and they vote on it, even overruling Thomas Sankara himself in terms of policies that he likes. Sometimes they'll say, no, we're not going to do that because we don't like it, right? So demonstrating that he's pretty, he's not a dictator, but he does wield a lot of power anyway, and he's able to do a lot of things through this council or through his own actions. Some things on the front of basic needs and public health. He prioritized feeding and housing for people and health care for people. And he launched a mass vaccination campaign and vaccinated 2 million people against polio, meningitis, and measles. The infant mortality rate in the country dropped from 20% to 14% during his presidency. His government is the first African government that acknowledged the AIDS epidemic as a serious threat. And it was a very, very serious threat in Africa in particular, obviously all over the world, but Africa was really, really hit hard by AIDS. So he was literally the first government that acknowledged that. He launched the People's Harvest of Forest Nurseries and launched a huge tree planting project and planted tons and tons of trees because deforestation was a huge part of colonialism. The colonialism was extracting tons and tons of resources from Africa. Planting a ton of new trees is a huge part of reclaiming that. Okay, so on agriculture, he invested tons of the country's resources into developing, more agriculture and livestock and fishing and forestry. Created cereal banks to help farmers and store their surplus. He nationalized all of the land in the country in 1984, stripped all of the local chiefs of their power. A big thing that he believed in was that the sort of traditional culture was mainly a source of like corruption, basically, that like local chiefs who have like traditional power holdings were just an obstruction to instituting like a policy that they want to do, right? That would make the country better off. So this is sort of what I would say is a bit of a controversial take. I mean, most of what he was doing is very controversial, but even like from my perspective, this part is pretty controversial, I think, because like the indigenous culture is sort of part of what you want to like preserve in some sense. But who am I to say what Thomas Sankara should be doing? Another aspect that I wanted to get into was the work on women's rights. So something that he said is that there is no true social liberation without the liberation of women. There was a huge prioritization of including women, and he banned female genital mutilation, forced marriage, and polygamy for like government officials. This was huge for women's rights. Like nobody really cared about women's rights on such a big level before this too. So he promoted education and workforce participation for women, even during pregnancy. And then he removed all restrictions on contraception in 1986. I forgot to mention, going through this timeline, that in 1984, so exactly 1 year after he started his presidency, he renames the whole country. It is not Upper Volta anymore. That is the French colony name. He renames the country to Burkina Faso. So Burkina Faso is the name of the country to this day. It is not Upper Volta anymore. And Burkina Faso, in the native languages of the country, means the land of the upright people. So, he's really trying to come out with, all of these radical changes, and then along with it comes a whole rebrand of the entire country, basically. The land of the upright people. He designs the new flag for the country himself. He writes the national anthem himself. He writes a new national anthem for the country. So very, very rebranding the country on to reflect his radical policy changes. Yeah, so there's all of this like really radical policy changes and really sort of rejection of French influence on the country. That's like a really big part of it. So he nationalized all the land, and in particular what that means is that the French cannot come in and control things, despite it no longer being a French colony. France still had a huge influence on the country. And so he's basically pushing all of that out. So that's his presidency. There's a lot of other stuff too, and there's a lot of really radical changes that he implemented over a few years. This made certain people very upset, in particular France. And so his friend who helped put him into power, Blaise Compaoré, then does a coup and kills him and puts himself in as president now.
This guy was his friend. I don't know what kind of friend that is.
Yeah.
Not a good one.
Right. Essentially, the official story is that he did this because he didn't like how it was jeopardizing the country's relationship with other countries like France. That's sort of like a cleaned up version of saying he's a French agent and France said like, hey, we don't like this guy, take him out. Macron, the current president of France, I think he's the current president of France, a few years ago released a bunch of documents that basically show, not explicitly that they gave some kind of command to execute him, but basically they were like tracking him a lot. They were like keeping tabs on him. They were in communication with Compaoré. They were, basically every evidence you could expect to really find that says that they orchestrated this assassination and put their guy in power, which is Compaoré. So in 2021, Compaore was actually charged with the murder of Thomas Sankara and found guilty by a military tribunal. Justice. So the thing I find so interesting about this story is just how someone can come to power and institute a bunch of changes that are very positive, like measurably positive outcomes for the economy, for women, for workers, for, infant mortality rates going down, all these things, rooting out corruption. And the way that incites a reaction from France in this case, but in general from basically the forces of colonialism and imperialism will come in and kill it, right?
Hello. This is me from the future. Well, the future from when we filmed that video. Our audio got messed up towards the end of recording. So instead of putting in the clip with the audio from our camera, which sounds really terrible, I just figured I would hop on while I'm editing to say thank you for listening. I'm sorry the episode got cut a little bit short. And yeah, thank you for listening. We hope to see you guys on the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe to us and leave us a review, leave us a comment. Also follow us on Instagram at brainworms_pod. Thank you. Bye.